From the beginning.
So this is the last time we're going to do that. I was prepared to dislike Max Collada even before I knew him. The war had just finished, and the passenger traffic in the ocean-going liners was heavy. Accommodation was very hard to get, and you had to put up with whatever agents chose to offer you. You could not hope for a cabin to yourself, and I was thankful to be given to one in which there were only 2 berths. But when I was told the name of my companion, my heart sank. It suggested closed portholes and the night air rigidly excluded. It was bad enough to share a cabin for 14 days with anyone. I was going from San Francisco to Yokohama. But I should have looked down upon it with less dismay if my fellow passenger's name had been Smith or Brown. When I went on board, I found Mr. Collada's luggage already below. I did not like the look of it. There were too many labels on the suitcases, and the wardrobe trunk was too big. He had unpacked his toilet things, and I observed that he was a patron of the excellent Monsieur Coty. For I saw the washing stand, his scent, his hair wash, and it was brilliantine. Mr. Collada's brushes, ebony, with his monogram in gold, would have been all the better for a scrub. I did not like Mr. Collada. I made my way into the smoking room. I called for a pack of cards and began to play patience. I had scarcely started before a man came up to me and asked if he was right in thinking that my name was so-and-so. I am Mr. Collada, he added, with a smile that showed a row of flashing teeth, and sat down. Oh, yes, we're sharing a cabin, I think. A bit of luck, I call it. You never know who you're going to be put up with. I was jolly glad when I heard you were English. I'm all for us English sticking together when we're abroad, if you understand what I mean. I blinked. Are you English? I asked, perhaps tactlessly. Rather. You don't think I look American, do you? British to the backbone, that's what I am. To prove it, Mr. Collada took out of his pocket a passport and airily waved it under my nose. King George had many strange subjects. Mr. Collada was short and of a sturdy build, clean-shaven and dark-skinned, with a fleshy, hooked nose, with a very large, lustrous, liquid eyes. His long black hair was sleek and curly. He spoke with fluency in which there was nothing English, and his gestures were exuberant. I felt pretty sure that a closer inspection of that British passport would have betrayed the fact that Mr. Collada was born under the bluer sky than is generally seen in England. What will you have? He asked me. I looked at him doubtfully. Prohibition was in force, and all appearances the ship was bone dry. When I am not thirsty, I do not know what I dislike more, ginger ale or lemon squash. But Mr. Collada flashed an oriental smile at me. Whiskey or soda or a dry martini? He had only to say the word. From each of his pockets, he fished a flask and laid them on the table before me. I chose a martini, and calling the steward, he ordered a tumbler of ice and a couple of glasses. A very good cocktail, I said. Well, there are plenty more wherever that came from, and if you've got any friends on board, you tell them you've got a pal who's got all the liquor in the world. Mr. Collada was chatty. He talked of New York and of San Francisco. He discussed plays and pictures and politics. He was patriotic. The Union Jack is an impressive piece of drapery, but when it's flourished by a gentleman from Alexandria, Beirut, I cannot but feel that it loses some of its dignity. Mr. Collada was familiar. I do not wish to put on airs, but I cannot help feeling that it was seemingly in a total stranger to put Mr. before my name when he addresses me. Mr. Collada, doubtless, to set me at ease, used no such formality. I did not like Mr. Collada. I had put aside the cards when he sat down, but now, thinking that this was for this occasion, our conversation had lasted long enough, I went on with my game. "The 3 on the 4, said Mr. Cullada. "There's nothing more exasperating when you're playing patience than to be told where to put your card. You have turned it up before you and had a chance to look at it yourself. It's coming out, he cried. "The 10 on the knave." With rage and hatred in my heart, I finished. And then he seized the pack. "Do you like card tricks?" "No, I hate card tricks," I answered. "Well, I'll just show you this one." He showed me 3. Then I said I would go down to the dining room and get my seat at the table. "Oh, that's all right," he said. "I've already taken a seat for you. I thought that as long as we're in the same stateroom, we might as well sit together at the same table." I did not like Mr. Cullada. I not only shared a cabin with him and ate 3 meals a day at the same table, but I could not walk around the deck without him joining me. It was impossible to snub him. It never occurred to him that he was not wanted. He was certain that you were glad to see him as he was to see you. And in your own house, you might have kicked him downstairs or slammed the door in his face without the suspicion dawning on him that he was not welcome visitor. He was a good mixer, and in 3 days knew everybody on board. He ran everything. He managed the sweep, conducted the auditions, collected money for the prizes of sports, got up to golf matches, occasionally organized the concert, and arranged the fancy dress ball. He was everywhere and always. He was certainly the best hated man on the ship. We all knew Mr. Know-All. We all called him Mr. Know-All, even to his face. He took it as a compliment. But it was at meal times he was most intolerable. For the better part of an hour, then he had it at his mercy. He was hearty, jovial, loquacious, and argumentative. He knew everything better than anybody else, and it was an affront to his overwhelming vanity that you should disagree with him. He would not drop a subject, however unimportant, till he had brought you around his way of thinking. The possibility that he could have been mistaken never occurred to him. He was a chap, you know. We sat at the doctor's table. Mr. Cullada would certainly have had it his own way, for the doctor was lazy and I was frigidly indifferent, except for a man called Ramsay, who sat there also. He was as dogmatic as Mr. Cullada, and resented bitterly the Levantines' cocksureness. The discussions they had were acrimonious and interminable. Ramsay was the American Consular Service and was stationed at Cove. He was a great heavy fellow from the Middle East, with loose fat under the tight skin, and he bulged out of his ready-made clothes. He was on his way back to resume his post, having been on a flying visit to New York to fetch his wife, who had been spending a year at home. Mrs. Ramsay was a very pretty little thing, with pleasant manners and a sense of humor. The consular service is ill-paid, and she was dressed very simply. But she knew how to wear her clothes. She achieved an effect of quite distinction. I should not have paid any particular attention to her, but that she possessed a quality that may be common enough in women, but nowadays is not obvious in their demure. You could not look at her without being struck by her modesty. It shone like a flower on a coat. One evening at dinner, the conversation by chance drifted to the subject of pearls. There had been in the paper a good deal of talk about the culture pearls, which the cunning Japanese were making, and the doctor remarked that they were almost inevitably diminish the value of real ones. They were very good already. They would soon be perfect. Mr. Cullada, as was his habit, rushed the new topic. He told us all that was to be known about pearls. I do not believe that Ramsay knew anything about them at all, but he could not resist the opportunity to have a fling at the Levantine. And in 5 minutes, we were in the middle of a heated argument. I had seen Mr. Cullada vehement and voluble before, but never so voluble and vehement as now. At last, something that Ramsay had said stung him, for he thumped the table and shouted, "Well, I ought to know what I'm talking about. I'm going to Japan just to look at this Japanese pearl business. I'm in the trade, and there's not a man in it who won't tell you that I say what I say about pearls goes. I know all the best pearls in the world, and what I don't know about pearls isn't worth knowing. Here was news for us, for Mr. Collada, with all his loquacency, had never told anyone what his business was. We only knew vaguely that he was going to Japan on some commercial errand. He looked around the table triumphantly. They'll never be able to capture a cultured pearl, get a cultured pearl, that an expert like me can't tell with half an eye. He pointed to a chain on Mrs. Ramsey that Miss Ramsey wore. You take my word for it, Miss Ramsey. That chain you're wearing will never be worth a cent less than it is now. Miss Ramsey, in her modest way, flushed a little and slipped the chain inside her dress. Ramsey moved forward. He gave us a look and a smile flickered in his eyes. That's a pretty chain of Miss Ramsey's, isn't it? I noticed it once, said Mr. Collada. Gee, I said to myself, those are pearls, all right. I didn't buy it myself, of course. I'd be interested to know how much you think it cost. Oh, in a trade, somewhere around $15,000. But if it was brought up on Fifth Avenue, I shouldn't be surprised to hear anything up to $30,000 was paid for it. Ramsey smiled grimly. You'll be surprised to hear, Mr. Ramsey. Mrs. Ramsey bought that string at a department store before we left for New York for $18. Mr. Collada flushed. Rot! It's not only real, but it's as fine a string for its size I've ever seen. Will you bet on it? I'll bet $100 it's imitation. Done. Oh, Elmer, you can't bet on a certainty, said Miss Ramsey. She said with a little smile on her lips, and her tone was gently deprecating. Can't I? If I can get easy money like that, I should be all sorts of a fool not to take it. But how can it be proved? She continued. It's only my word against Mr. Collada's. Let me look at that chain, and if it's imitation, I'll tell you quickly enough. I can't afford to lose $100, said Mr. Collada. Take it off, dear. Let the gentleman look at as much as he wants. Mrs. Ramsey hesitated a moment. She put her hands to the clasp. I can't undo it, she said. Mr. Collada will just have to take my word for it. I had a sudden suspicion that something unfortunate was about to occur, but I could think of nothing to say. Ramsey jumped up. I'll undo it. He handed the chain to Mr. Collada. The Levantine took a magnifying glass from his pocket and closely examined it. A smile of triumph spread over his smooth and swarthy face. He handed back the chain. He was about to speak. Suddenly he caught the sight of Mrs. Ramsey's face. It was so white that she looked almost as if she were about to faint. She was staring at him with wide and terrified eyes. They held a desperate appeal. It was so clear that I wondered why her husband did not see it. Mr. Collada stopped with his mouth open. He flushed deeply. You could almost see the effect he was making over himself. I was mistaken, he said. It's a very good imitation. But of course, as soon as I looked through my glass, I saw that it wasn't real. I think $18 is just about as much as the damn thing's worth. He took out of his pocketbook and from it $100 note. He handed it to Ramsey without a word. Perhaps that'll teach you not to be so cocksure another time, my young friend, said Mr. Ramsey. He took the note. I noticed Mr. Collada's hands trembling. The story spread over the ship as stories do, and he had to put up with a good deal of chaff that evening. It was a fine joke that Mr. Know-All had been caught out. But Mrs. Ramsey retired to her stateroom with a headache. Next morning I got up and began to shave. Mr. Collada lay on his bed smoking a cigarette. Suddenly there was a small scraping sound, and I saw a letter pushed under the door. I opened the door and looked out. There was nobody there. I picked up the letter and saw it was addressed to Max Collada. The name was written in block letters. I handed it to him. Who's this from? He opened it. Oh! He took out of the envelope, not a letter, but $100 note. He looked at me, and again he reddened. He tore the envelope into little bits and gave it to me. Do you mind just... I did as he asked, and then I looked at him with a smile. No one likes to be made to look a perfect damn fool, he said. Were the pearls real? If I had a pretty little wife, I shouldn't let her spend a year in New York while I stayed at Cobb, he said. At that moment, I did not entirely dislike Mr. Collada. He reached out for his pocketbook and carefully inserted the $100 note.